Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Major updates as the Barcelona test is rapidly approaching. The power unit drama of recent weeks has gone to a new level today, with big rumours that Mercedes and Red Bull were both exploiting this compression ratio idea to gain an advantage in this grey area in the regulations. But according to new reports today, only one of those two manufacturers is actually using this secret technique, and therefore the competitive picture when it comes to the voting behind the scenes and the way that the teams and the politics might play out is changing rather rapidly, especially with rumours that Audi rather than Ferrari are the key team opposing this idea. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into. Max with Daniel Ricciardo, Arvid Lindblad. I think they were doing something with Red Bull that's been, well, broadcast or is about to get seen. Now, speaking of Max Verstappen, yes, he is trying to get ready for the new season. And how's he going to do that? He's going to test some GT3 cars. If you guys are unfamiliar, he's moving his Verstappen.com Racing, whatever it's called, I think it's just Verstappen Racing now, his GT3 campaign, which he will be contributing to at least to some degree next season. He's moved from driving Ferrari 296 GT3s now to driving the AMG Mercedes. And this is particularly interesting just because of the whole Max to Mercedes thing, the Toto Wolff idea. And here he is at Portimao yesterday testing again this Mercedes AMG GT3. So pretty beautiful, actually. We'll see how that goes for the season. Couple of quick things on Ferrari. We did hint at this yesterday, but it's now been kind of more readily confirmed that the decisions Ferrari are making internally are based on the success in their WEC program and trying to bring some top individuals over. So we saw some talking points that apparently Fred Vasseur, there are top engineers coming over from the WEC program that's been very successful the last couple of seasons into the Formula 1 program, and apparently this is continuing. The exchange of technical staff between the F1 department and the WEC Hypercar program is being activated, especially involving engineers who are far from minor. So, you know, a big chunk of important, senior, very experienced, successful engineers are moving over. This is an internal flow aimed at leveraging the winning experience gained since Ferrari's entry into endurance prototype racing in 2023, where of course they've been very successful under this man on the left-hand side. Now, what does this mean? As I said yesterday, the question always at Ferrari is who's actually making these decisions. Is this Fred Vasseur saying, look, my boys, we don't know how to win. We need some of those lads. I don't think so, right? To me, this screams like it's a decision being made from the top level. John Alcant may be saying, oh, well, these lads are winning. These lads aren't winning. Let's put some of those lads over there. And look, maybe there's some logic in that, but I don't know, man. Ferrari continue to be Ferrari. Now, there's also further rumours on who is or is not going to make the test. This, of course, is the circuit Barcelona-Catalunya, whatever it's technically called. We're going there very shortly. Well, none of the media, of course, are going there, but the teams will be going there. But will all the teams be going there? That is the key question, because as we discussed over the last couple of days, rumours that some teams are delayed in their plan. We heard initially maybe 2-3 teams could be somewhat delayed. Now, whether they will make it by Wednesday and be able to run Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the test starts on Monday, but you can only run 3 of the 5 days of the week. Maybe that's not the end of the world. But the reality is that a lot of people are now saying that there is some risk that not all the teams are going to make it in time. The rumour the other day was that there was a top team that were concerned about making this happen. Now, apparently Ferrari are going to be absolutely fine, which makes some sense. I mean, they're revealing their car before the Barcelona test. They're doing so in Fiorano, where they will drive it around the track. So they will have a car ready, you would well imagine. But the other top team that could be missing it, we're going to talk about Aston Martin in a second, but there is also further rumours now from different sources that one team is behind the curve here and they might not even make it to the test related to aerodynamic delays. And this is particularly interesting given we're going to discuss a little bit on Aston Martin in a second and some rumours as to what they've been up to as of late. Now, Aston also have said, or at least it's been heavily hinted, they will be roughly 15 kilograms over the weight limit when the season starts. I don't think that will be unusual, to be honest, but there's a feeling that when the season begins, there will be at least a 10-kilogram difference between the weights of the heaviest and the lightest cars. That is roughly 0.3 a lap, people tend to say. Maybe that depends on the downforce levels the cars are producing as well. Of course, these cars are producing far lower downforce than the previous iteration, at least for the time being, because the Venturi tunnels on the floor are gone, so could even be a bigger deal than just that 0.3 we often talk about. But what about this Aston Martin story? Because it continues to emerge, and it's actually a really fascinating one right now. Look, bringing in Adrian Newey, yes, he might design a phenomenal car aerodynamically, but there are so many moving components here. The fuel, the engine, the electrical components, and also just the fact they've got a massive factory, they've got loads of staff, making everything work as one and work together is a challenge. Their simulator tools don't seem to have been that good. All sorts of questions to this end. And rumours emerging that actually Newey recognised that shortly after he joined the team. He actually mentioned specifically in an interview that their driver-in-the-loop simulator tools were nowhere near good enough for being an absolute top team. And apparently, after looking at the wind tunnel, they weren't getting the data that they believed correlated with reality. So Newey ordered it to be recalibrated last summer. Now, of course, at that time, they were already quite deep into the work on the AMR26, but apparently because of that, they had to reconsider a lot of their work, which means things, at least in terms of their final program, have been delayed somewhat. We heard hints at this the other day, but this is kind of the first time we've heard exactly what might have been causing it. And there was reports from, well, Gazetta as well, that said, yeah, they will not have their final version of the car ready for the start of the season. In fact, the definitive version, as in probably what might turn out to be just a straight up B-spec car, kind of like what they did in 2022, will arrive in the summer. Newey, after verifying that both the wind tunnel calculations and the computational ones provided unreliable data, ordered the recalibration. Now that, of course, happened a long time ago, but that set them back arguably months in their development. Now, it's difficult to imagine that can be a good thing exactly, but it might not be the end of the world, right? They turn up to the start of the season. It's all about the development this year anyway, and by maybe 6 to 7 races into the season, they're going to have a very competitive machine. I think that's what Aston Martin fans have to be hoping for, really. There are so many moving parts with that team, it's difficult to expect them to come out the gates with a rocket ship. And of course, people are theorizing what this could mean. Is it going to be an okay base car? Is it going to have loads of weaknesses? Are they going to bring major upgrades in Barcelona or somewhere else? Who knows, right? I guess time will tell. People are theorizing what it could mean for Alonso, win number 33, etc., etc. But that's the Aston Martin predicament. They seem to be behind the curve to a degree. But as I've said, does that mean they could be in this category of not making it in time to the test? On multiple levels now, we have heard that Aston Martin are further behind in their planning than other teams are, and arguably that they would like to be. This, as we've just discussed, is another reason or explanation potentially as to why. Will they have a car ready for Barcelona? Good question. I would say probably yes, but we don't know. And maybe if they are behind the curve, that's one of the reasons as to why there's going to be further talk really about how they're going to go in the mid-season rather than at the start of the year. Now, Peter Windsor says he thinks Alonso's going to win a race. Now, again, winning the championship, given what we've discussed, if you're really hopeful that Aston Martin and Alonso are going to win the championship, it looks a little bit more slim on this news, right? I mean, look, maybe Newey does bring the properly calibrated rocket ship 8 races into the season. That, could still be enough. But if you've lost points for 8 races in a row, it's obviously going to be a tough gap to close, even if the car all of a sudden is a consistent race winner. But Peter Windsor says he thinks he'd be shocked if Alonso doesn't win a race this year. Just to quickly look at the way the markets sit on this, Max is still considered title favourite, 26%. Then George Russell, then Lando Norris, then Oscar Piastri. But the 5th favourite, ahead of Antonelli, ahead of Charles Leclerc, ahead of Lewis Hamilton, is considered to be Fernando Alonso at 9%. And if you look at the constructors, you'll see a little bit of a similar story. I will say it's quite an interesting market here because there's been quite a lot of movement today in the market with Mercedes jumping up substantially and McLaren substantially dropping down. So smells to me like somebody who maybe either knows or doesn't know what's going on has put a serious amount of cash on Mercedes taking the win this season. But anyway, Aston Martin are also considered at 9% chance of winning the Constructors. So that's where things currently look in the prediction markets anyway. But this is the main drama on the engine-related drama of recent weeks. If you guys aren't familiar, there was a rumour that Mercedes are exploiting some trickery with materials or something else that allows them to get to a compression ratio in the engine of more like 18:1 in the cylinders rather than the 16:1, which is the mandated maximum in the rules. But the rules say that it's only tested at its limit. The reality is, because of the engine heating, I think it's quite likely the teams will experience a higher compression ratio than 16:1 anyway. So this is kind of one of the crux of the matters for Mercedes, and Mercedes reportedly went through the FIA and the whole process about this when they were coming up with this idea, realizing that this grey area existed that other teams simply didn't. But okay, can we prove Mercedes are doing this? First of all, yeah, they might be running 18:1, but we're not testing it while the engine's actually running. How do we know that they're doing it? They can say that they aren't, but also if they've worked with the FIA and said, well, we're going to try and do this using some special techniques that other teams haven't thought of, and the FIA say, well, we're only going to test it at ambient temperatures, it is what it is if you can get away with it. But as I say, the other teams are going 16:1. When the engines get hot, it's possible that those numbers creep up, 16.1, 16.2, whatever. Technically, that would also be illegal. So are we now testing every single car in every condition? It becomes very difficult to police. Now, the FIA may decide to find a solution here to shut out this trick, but what's interesting to me about this trick is that initially when we talked about it, this was very much a rumour. This was like, there's some talk that Mercedes might be doing this, but we're not really sure. Other teams might be not very happy with the FIA, but now this is being effectively reported as fact, right? The teams have not said anything about this themselves. James Vowles, who is speaking from a Williams perspective on the Mercedes engines that they will have, he didn't say anything about it. All he said is that teams are pushing a narrative to get the spotlight on Mercedes, really, to see if they can gain a political advantage from doing so. So nobody else is talking about it, but every media outlet and reporter seems to be effectively discussing this now as a fact, that Mercedes have this trick embedded into their engine. And, well, the rumour was that Red Bull had it as well. The initial discussion was that there was a Red Bull powertrains engineer who was formerly a Mercedes man who had recently come over and had kind of told Red Bull, this is what we were doing at Mercedes, we better get on this now. So there's been some talk about that Red Bull were kind of exploiting it, but not to the same extent. There was a rumour that if the FIA were to say, okay, Mercedes engine is illegal with this compression ratio trick that we think might give them another 15 horsepower, I think it was 13 horsepower was the number people talked about, that would translate potentially to 3-4 tenths a lap. It's a big deal, of course, and it may be a key conversation of the season. It may be a bit of a nothing burger when the season is here, right? This is always what's fascinating about this time of year. Right now, this feels like a really big deal. When the season starts, it might not be. There's probably going to be plenty other things going on and things to talk about as well, but it could well be particularly relevant. The other teams, especially Audi, certainly seem to think so. But the rumour was that Red Bull were exploiting something similar. Their runway, though, to do so wasn't as long as Mercedes, what they've been working on this trick for. The other teams are not even in the same stratosphere. But apparently Red Bull, if it was to be ruled illegal by the FIA and there was some sort of changes that were necessary, Red Bull had a way to go back to something that would be allowed. That was the talking point. But the latest talking point has actually changed the narrative. I'll leave the entire article linked down below for you guys who want to check it out, as always. But what they go on to say is that this has not been as talked about as much within the FIA and the teams as it is in the press, right? These power unit tricks, they're talked about a lot public facing, but apparently behind the scenes, it's not so much of a big deal, and, well, it's kind of unclear exactly where this will go next. They are sitting down on the 22nd of January to discuss, but according to new sources, Auto Racer has learned that Red Bull will not have this solution in their first power unit, which will debut very shortly. Indeed, the Milton's Keys unit is not expected to be up to the level of the best manufacturer, counting on development opportunities during the season, and this ADUO is like additional development, upgrade opportunities or whatever, that kicks in if you're 2% or 4% of power behind the top manufacturers. So that seems like there is some concern here from Red Bull that they actually might be quite a way off Mercedes, who are expected to be the benchmark in terms of pure output. But this is interesting that after some talk in recent weeks that Red Bull were going to have this trick, now apparently they don't. And as I said right at the start of the video, this is quite important when it comes to the politics of the situation. Red Bull power 2 teams, Red Bull Racing and of course Racing Bulls. Mercedes power 4. You add those up, that's 6 teams, right? So the idea was that there were 6 teams who were potentially going to be exploiting this compression ratio trick. And only 5 teams, the 3 Ferrari-powered teams, Scuderia Ferrari, Cadillac F1 and Haas, and then Honda with Aston Martin and Audi with Audi. And that would be that, right? You'd effectively have a 6-5 majority for the teams that were doing it. So if you want to have some sort of discussion on getting it banned or whatever, and that's going to be a tough conversation to have when you've got so many teams that will theoretically be on board with that idea with Mercedes and Red Bull. But if that's not the case, then it changes the tune to a degree. If Red Bull are also on the side of let's get this out of here, then all of a sudden they're on the side of the majority and makes it probably more likely that for next year, I don't think it's going to change this season, but mid-season is possible. There has been talk that maybe after a few races around about Miami, the FIA could say, all right, Mercedes, you're going to have to stop doing this. You're going to have to find another way to make these engines run. But I think it's more likely that for 2027 they say, all right, this has to stop now. But because Red Bull apparently are no longer part of it, it does change the dynamic politically. The other key talking point further on in the article was about which manufacturer is most opposed to this. And apparently that manufacturer is not Ferrari, but Audi. Now, this is quite interesting because Audi, well, how competitive are they going to be? That's the question. If they're not expecting much in terms of their own competitiveness this season, you might think, well, they might not care, right? But also, we know that Audi and Mercedes are going to have, hopefully, in coming seasons, something of a rivalry. And what I mean by that is the whole German thing. When Audi first came into the sport, they actually made it part of their pledge that, like, okay, we are going to be the German team. We are going to do it right because Mercedes, they're not even German. You know, eventually the implication was they're a British team because at the time anyway, they had 2 British drivers based in the UK. A lot of their staff are British, right? So Mercedes, yeah, they might be a German manufacturer, but effectively they are a British Formula 1 team. Audi said we're going to do it properly, was effectively the implication. So I can see a rivalry there. Hopefully at some point we get a nice Mercedes-Audi rivalry on the track. I think that would be pretty nice. I don't think it's going to be happening immediately with Audi's theoretical competitiveness, but apparently it's not Ferrari that are pushing the hardest on this, which is quite interesting because we're not expecting Audi to be competing at the front of the grid. Now look, if you're not doing this trick and Mercedes are, then of course you're going to be against it, right? Obviously. But the fact that Audi and Mattia Binotto, former Ferrari man, are pushing this the hardest is interesting. Maybe it means that Ferrari are in a better spot than they might have otherwise been. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Because if I'm Ferrari, or if I'm Audi, let's say, and I know my engine isn't up to scratch, which Audi themselves have admitted, they probably don't want to be embarrassingly off the back. So the argument of them pushing hard to get Mercedes trick banned, interesting. Ferrari may feel like they're actually in the ballpark, and if they are, then maybe there's no big deal, right? Maybe they don't think the Mercedes are getting much advantage. This is the other point. How much advantage are Mercedes really getting out of this? The idea that they go from 16 to 18, a lot of engineers were saying when it was first rumoured that that is going to be incredibly challenging to achieve. Maybe Mercedes have done it, but there's a feeling that they probably won't get to 18. They might get to 16.5, they might get to 17.2, I don't know, but they might not get to 18. And of course that has implications for the way that the fuel is going to burn, and the fuels are brand new, and the lubricants are changed, and there's all sorts of things going on. So lots of complexity, lots of potential reliability trouble, but it's just a big development on this whole power unit story, because not only does it seem more clear than ever that yes, Mercedes are doing something, but it's becoming clearer that Red Bull don't have it, which is going to be important for their competitiveness, but also for the political landscape with what it means for Ferrari and Audi as well. So yeah, more to come on this, but as I say, there is a plausible world here where this is a big story of the off-season, but according to the Auto Racer report, the FIA and the teams, there's other things they're talking about. There's plenty of other things that they've got to deal with as well. So this may not be the biggest story when the season properly gets underway, but it could still be a critical component to who's actually going to win this season. So tweet your thoughts in the comments below. Thought this is pretty remarkable. In a 50 race period, of course, you can take like any 50 race period. So if you have 39, then naturally you're going to have 37, 36, whatever, all the way down to 31. But it looks pretty on the graphic to display it like this. Max, at his best, and his most dominant, won 39 races from a 50-race period. The best that Schumacher and Hamilton managed was 31. In terms of pole positions, this is pretty interesting. Verstappen isn't actually on this list. Vettel, Schumacher, and Hamilton all tied at 29. It's pretty remarkable that Hamilton and Schumacher are both the same in both of these regards. But it's Ayrton Senna who had 38 and therefore 37, 36, etc. But yes, very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Thanks to all those watching lately on YouTube, but also on Spotify. Loads of new followers recently on Spotify, so I would appreciate all of you who have continued to join and have done so already. Whatever, you guys get the picture. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.